another reaction video, and this one is a really good one. I'm gonna press play in a second, but just from the outset, you can see we've got a couple of blokes. We've got the Deputy Prime Minister, David Littleproud. I know that Senator McGrath is out of shot at the moment. But it's really funny, and a lot of people do comment on this, when you just get this kind of wall of blue shirts when politicians go out back. They go to country towns, especially in Queensland, and there's always an issue around diversity. And it really makes me sort of think, I'd hate to see a token woman just put there in the press conference and sort of there just to make it look a bit different. But it really shows how there is a lack of representation and diversity when you've got 5 people standing there in a press conference. 3 of them are ministers, 1 of them's a senator. There's probably some other people off to the side, and they're all in the same blue business shirt. So we're going to press play. It's starting off with some questions to Scott Morrison. There he is there. You'll see he's in his baseball cap. He loves his baseball cap. It's another way of him saying to you that he's an ordinary bloke, and there's nothing really that different about him to you.
One thing I've noticed is the Federal Labor Party have tended to play politics both with the pandemic and the recovery.
Oh my God, that is absolute.
What we'll do is we'll just make the best decisions for Australia based on the best
pause
information.
it here because Scott Morrison has just said that the Labor Party is playing politics with the pandemic and the recovery, and it really couldn't be further from the truth. During the pandemic, I remember when the government wanted to pass legislation for job seeker and job keeper, and we had a lot of issues around borders, so that only a certain amount of politicians could go. But the Labor Party was really, supportive of this, and we didn't want Parliament to be cancelled. We wanted it to be held, but we went along and passed the job seeker legislation. It was a really, it was a quick thing. We needed to get it done quickly so it could get out to people as soon as possible. There were lines of people around Centrelink just waiting to get this money. So we passed that legislation with the government. And then we suggested that there should be a wage subsidy, like JobKeeper eventually ended up. So when the government had to go back, they realised how desperate this situation was going to be. They brought Parliament back, and we had another sitting of Parliament, and JobKeeper was passed. And again, we pointed out where we thought it could be better, but we passed that legislation. During the GFC, you did not see the same behaviour from the opposition under the LNP. They were very critical. They opposed and voted against some really important legislation. So to say that Labor is playing politics by pointing out where things could be better or where the government isn't doing enough is not, it's just not good enough. And he's doing this in a way to try to dismiss the really genuine concerns that people in the community have.
We'll target it.
What a way to start the video,
well thought through.
In your baseball cap.
We won't be making, commitments ahead of any time that they would be needed. And we've done that all the way through. And we heard the same calls.
He's talking about JobKeeper here, and this is a really live issue right now. This is a video from last week.
What did we see happen?
We really want to see an answer about this, and people are really nervous about what's going to happen in a couple of weeks.
And more than 2 million Australians no longer needing
what Scott Morrison is saying right now is just not what is happening on the ground here in Cairns.
They said it was all going to fall apart.
People are really,
and that's
really
not what
concerned.
Australia needs to hear. What Australia needs is what we've been seeking to do, and that is bring Australians together. To provide the support where
Australia needs to hear the truth.
And to do that
Australia
carefully,
needs to hear the
because
truth.
it's all taxpayers' money, and we invest it carefully and wisely and proportionately. And we work
We've called
with
for
those
targeted
sectors to make
support.
sure
We
it's
haven't
done in the
called
most
for a
effective
blank
way.
check.
So
I'll
trying
to equate this to some sort of issue around taxpayer money.
Engage in the politics
it's
of
just,
recovery.
again, Scott
I'll just
Morrison
engage in the
deflecting
economics
from
of
a really important question.
Willing to consider regional support packages like JobKeeper.
God, that baseball cap really annoys me.
Well, again, I'm not going to preempt or fly kites on these things. I don't think that's fair to people. We've been
couldn't really hear that question, but it was about whether there should be a tourism package for places like Cairns or the Whitsundays or industries that are really impacted. And again, he doesn't have an answer, he doesn't have a plan, so he's got to deflect from that question.
Sound decisions in the country's interests. And that's what we've been doing for the past year. Last night I was on a call, as I regularly am, with many other leaders last night, the Prime Minister of Israel, the Prime Minister of Norway, and a number of others, Greece and Denmark,
God.
and
Now it's just
amongst this
name
group, and Austria,
dropping
that we've met with
world
regularly.
leaders.
And to hear what is
That's what
occurring in
people in
Europe,
Cairns
it
wanna
breaks
hear.
your heart what they're
Like,
going
great,
through.
you had a phone call with the
And it's
leader of
just
Israel.
Reinforced
That's
to
not
me
helpful.
the thankful position we are here in Australia with the choices we've made and the way that Australians have reacted.
Okay.
And
So we're
supported
back to this world
Australia to come
comparison. So
through
comparing
this
what
is
we're
a
going
great
through
testimony
here
of
in
this country, and
Cairns
it's been
to what
noticed by
you're
people
going
all around
through
the world.
in the
They
UK,
wish they were
France, and
us.
other parts
They
of the
really
world.
wish they were us.
That doesn't
that
really
is a
mean
testimony
anything
to
to
the
someone who's
Australian
about
people,
to
but I
lose their
think also
business.
working together with the states and
I
territories.
don't just think this
in a
is
very
crazy that he
bipartisan
keeps
way
going down this
with the
track,
Labor
because
premiers,
it doesn't
the
matter
Liberal
what country you
premiers.
live in. If you lose your business
We've
and
all
you've got to
worked
sack
together
your
to
workers,
try and do our
it's,
best to make the
bad
best
news.
decisions at the right time, and we'll continue to do that.
In conversations with Mike Pompeo and Mike Pence,
Mm.
did you raise their support for Australia in our somewhat difficult relationship at the moment with China?
Did I raise what, sorry?
Was the China relationship discussed, their support for Australia in?
It's a little hard to hear the questions.
Well, I
But
was
it is
pleased to be
interesting.
able to talk
I'll
to
explain
Vice
a little bit
President Pence
about
this
how
morning
the
and
press conference
Secretary
works.
Pompeo
So
yesterday. I've
you've
worked
got
very
the
closely with both of them,
journalists,
particular,
and they're
along with Treasury
in
Secretary
Outback, Queensland. So
Morrison
those
and the
journalists
former
would have had
Defence
to be
Secretary
invited by the
And
Prime
they have
Minister
been a
to
key
go out
part
there.
of how we've
Usually what
managed that
happens is the Prime
relationship
Minister's
over the
office
last-
would let
over the last many
either the
years.
Australian or the
And
Courier
the
Mail
cornerstone
know
of that
that
has
they're
been an
heading out there, and they
understanding
would
of
invite
just
one
how
of the
important
journalists to
Australia
come along.
and the United States are to
Often
each
what
other.
happens is
How shared we are in our outlook about
the
things
Prime
in the
Minister's
world,
office or the
threats to that,
person or the
and how
politician
we
that's travelling
can
out
work
there
positively
will try to
together,
get the
to deal with
journalists
those
that
in
they
both of our
like or
national
that they
interests
work with
and
or who
those of
writes
many other
positive things
like-minded
about them.
countries. So
And
it
other
was an
times the
opportunity to
newspaper will
thank,
send the person that they
both
want. So
Secretary Pompeo
you've got
and
at the
Vice
moment, I
President
can hear
Pence for
that
the
you've got
very constructive way
a
that
journalist
they've
from the
supported that
Australian and a
relationship
journalist
and
from the
the
Courier
very
Mail
open
who are
way that
both
they've engaged with me as a
asking
Prime
questions.
Minister
And this is a question
previously,
about
the
Joe
Secretary
Biden
Mnuchin
and
as a treasurer.
Mike
And
Pence
so
and
we spoke about
weird stuff
how
about
important that
Donald
relation
Trump.
is now. Probably more
It is
important
quite a
than ever.
juxtaposition
And,
to
really
see
welcomed their
Morrison
offers of
answer a
the
question about US
engagements they've
politics
had with
in the middle of
incoming
the Queensland
administration,
outback.
which, I welcome the
But when
fact that
you're on
despite
tour
all the
and you've got a national
terrible things
newspaper
we've seen
there
there
asking
happen,
questions, you have to
there
answer
is
all these
been
types
that
of questions
positive engagement
anyway.
between them and
The reason
and
the
those
journalists
who
are
are
asking
coming
these
in after
questions
them.
is because
And
Morrison's
there is
been
a
kind of
handover.
caught
And
out a
one of
little
the
bit.
things that will be
He
handed
has
over
been
from the current
really close to
administration
Donald
to the new
Trump
one this
during
week
his term of parliament.
is
He even
the
went to one of his
stewardship of that very
campaign
important
events,
relationship
which
between
is a
Australia and the
weird
United
thing for a
States.
prime minister to do.
Prime Minister, I have the privilege to
So
steward that.
he's being sort of
from
probed
Australia's
about this
perspective.
because
And,
he's
the
been
incoming
left a little bit
President,
embarrassed about his
President-elect
support
Biden,
for Trump during
will
the
join me in
campaign.
that stewardship.
Now
And
we
it's
know
incredibly
how
important
terribly
for our
things ended
region.
in the
It's
US.
incredibly important for Australia's interests, and I say it's very important for the United States' interest as well.
Do you expect the Biden administration?
A really long
to
answer,
Australia
which
as
means he's
strongly
trying to
when there
drag
are
it out.
disputes with China as well, the Trump administration?
I would expect there would be a
Gosh,
continuation
it looks hot out there. I
of
don't
those
envy
policy
being
settings that
David
have so
Little
favoured the Australian
standing behind
alliance.
the Scott Morrison.
And that's not new. It's been happening for
hot.
decades. The alliance between Australia and the United States.
But that's another thing to
has known
understand.
many
Is it's
stewards
really important who
sitting on
stands
both sides of
behind
the
the
table
Prime
as
Minister.
presidents and prime ministers. They've
The
come
person is
from
usually
all
the
sides
local
of
member
politics.
or
But
the
the one thing that
local
has always
senator.
brought us together
And the idea is
has
to get
been,
that person
our
on telly as
understanding of how
well.
strategic
You'll see
and
David
significant
Little
the
Proud is standing
relationship
just
is.
behind the Scott
And,
Morrison's shoulder.
the best of that
So he
relationship,
is the
as
one that's in the
said
shot the
Vice
whole
President
time
Pence this
that the
morning,
Prime
is
Minister's
still to come.
talking. What's also interesting is you really have to kind of keep a bit of a straight face while that's happening. You don't want to be rolling your eyes or shaking your head. Is another question from the Courier Mail.
Reporting on Friday, and would you have any concerns about it potentially leading to the spread of COVID in regional areas where they don't have the same testing capacity as in the capital city?
Oh, well, 2 points. One, I'm meeting with Premier Palaszczuk later this
long
week
question.
when I go back through Brisbane. And I'm sure I look forward to having that discussion. I haven't seen that proposal as yet, but I've always been very interested in positive proposals
All right,
that
I'm
have
just
come
going to
forward
pause
from
this
premiers
because
about
this is
how we
pretty
can
funny.
best manage what are very
Morrison's
challenging
being
issues.
asked about the possibility of creating a quarantine camp in one of the mining towns. Queensland has a lot of mining towns, and often there's a big use of accommodation to get workers in and off site. And there's some camps that might be able to be used for quarantine. And it's something that Anastasia Palaszczuk has been talking about as a possibility. And it's funny to watch Scott Morrison now talk about working closely with Anastasia Palaszczuk and how he's open to all of these ideas, because we know back in October, he was very critical of Anastasia Palaszczuk during the state election. He is definitely one of those people that will just change his tune if it suits him. And again, now he's being very complimentary of the state government, working closely with the state government. But what we know is he has gone about the last couple of months undermining what the state government has been doing around borders. And here the question about quarantining is really interesting because, again, quarantine is a federal responsibility. And even though I know that the Premier is trying to do her best, trying to find a solution, really it should be the federal government coming up with these solutions. So he's been asked about whether he thinks it's a good idea. He's deflecting because he doesn't really want to give an answer on one way or the other. There's some people that have some concerns about whether having a mining camp being used as a quarantine facility would then lead to an outbreak in regional areas. And that's a really valid concern. There would be ways to get around that. But to be asked about quarantine facilities when it is literally your job to do quarantining and then not have an answer about it is ridiculous. And I think the rest of this answer will just be ducking and weaving and swerving and spinning. I'll put money on it.
We already have these types of arrangements up in the Northern Territory. That's how we're, the 20 extra flights that I agreed to and endorsed and acted on with the Deputy Prime Minister on the weekend. That's in addition, I think, Michael, to some 70.
Again, another thing that the state government put forward as an idea in the Northern Territory. He's sort of trying to claim credit for it now, which is just very typical Scott Morrison.
We've been able to do in the Northern Territory with Chief Minister Gunner. So I'm very open to these sorts of ideas, and I look forward to seeing the proposal, and then we'll go from there. Premier Palaszczuk knows that my door is always open to those sorts of discussions, and I look forward to having them with her.
When you spoke to Vice President Mike Pence, did you ask at all about, or did you speak at all about Donald Trump and his refusal to concede the election?
No.
So there's another final question here about the US politics, but I think that's where we're going to leave Scott Morrison today. You'll see that there's a lot of questions that he's been asked about tourism and JobKeeper, and this was only a week ago, and he still doesn't seem to really have an answer. It's pretty concerning that with JobKeeper ending at the end of March, that we don't have a plan in place about how certain industries will be transitioning. This was a tour that Scott Morrison did throughout regional Queensland. I think this was one of the first stops that he did. And it's always good for politicians to get out and about and go to regional areas, but he didn't end up coming to Cairns, and he didn't end up visiting places like the Whitsundays that are really, really reliant on international tourism. And there's important things that prime ministers and politicians have to go and see and talk to people about. But I would have thought that communities that are at the moment on their knees because of the lack of international tourism would be a pretty important thing for Scott Morrison to do. Instead, he's out and about wearing his baseball cap and fobbing off questions about tourism and JobKeeper. So I guess we'll have to wait and see if the government actually does come to the party and do something. We've certainly been calling for them to do that. That's it for another reaction video. Thanks so much for joining me. If you've got any suggestions about videos that you want me to decode and react, please send them through to me. Otherwise, I'll probably just keep tearing shreds off the Prime Minister. See you guys. Bye.